Well, thank you, Rick. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. And I want to read a little biography to introduce everyone to your background if they haven't heard of you or haven't read one of your books yet. Rick Atkinson is a Pulitzer Prize winning author and one of America's most respected military historians. He's known for his vivid storytelling, meticulous research, and Atkinson has brought to life the defining battles of American history in both his acclaimed Liberation trilogy of World War II and now the ongoing Revolution trilogy. In his latest volume, The Fate of the Day, which I have right here, he continues his sweeping narrative of the American Revolution, chronicling the dramatic middle years of the conflict, so roughly the summer of 1777 to the summer of 1780. So, with gripping prose, deep understanding of the human cost of war, Atkinson offers readers profound looks at the courage, sacrifice, and endurance that defined Americans' democracy. So, Rick, thanks for joining us and for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you,
And
Kevin.
thank you. And one of the first things I wanted to start with, if you don't mind, speaking of helping me, a young 16-year-old reader, understand the human cost of war, the very first book that I ever read of yours was The Long Gray Line.
Oh, look at that. That's a galley that really
Yes.
dates us
We,
both, Kevin.
we got spring of 1990, my AP US history teacher, who I'd had several times in my school, middle school and high school were in the same building. So I had him for sixth grade history and then later for 11th grade history. And he had us all read that book in the spring of 1990. And
Mm,
it was, as a 16-year-old, I was like, it was the first like grown-up history book to me. And it was just amazing, fascinating. It really started my interest in military history and military service. And I ended up going to the Virginia Military Institute,
hmm
partly because of reading about West Point and duty, honor, country is fascinating. And so, um, this is I've always held this book in high regard. It's a really vivid memory for me reading The Long Gray Line.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I'm glad you don't blame me for the turn you took in your life.
No, no, not at all.
Yeah, that book was published in the fall of 1989. It was the first book that I ever wrote. And, you know, I got interested in them when I was a newspaper reporter in Kansas City through a happy sequence of accidents. And I went to their 15th reunion in 1981, and I wrote about that as a newspaper series. And it won the Pulitzer Prize. I went back 5 years later to their 20th reunion, and this time reporting it as a book because, those who had stayed in the Army after their 5 year obligation, 4 year obligation at that time, were now eligible to retire, and a full generation of Army officer was passing. And the class is singular for a number of reasons. Out of 579 men, and they were all men in those days, uh, 30 of them were killed in Vietnam. It's the highest death
Hmm.
toll for any of the West Point classes. And they had arrived at West Point in the summer of 1962 as leaders of their generation, determined to do exactly what their fathers had done, to win whatever war needed to be won. In their fathers' cases, it was World War II. And after graduating from West Point, almost to a man, they were sent off right away to Vietnam. And the next thing you know, instead of being leaders of their generation, which is what they had been when they're 17, 18-year-olds going to West Point, they're pariahs in their generation because the country, I think, got confused and confused them with the war that the country didn't like. So they straddle a fault line in American history, I think.
Hmm.
So it's a 25-year social history of what happened to them starting at West Point through Vietnam and then after Vietnam, because they were all trying to find their way subsequently.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great story. Has it ever been approached to be a miniseries? It's got like a kind of a Band of Brothers sort of storyline to it, the generational story.
Yeah, yes, people have approached. It's been
Never.
optioned repeatedly for diminishing amounts of money, and nobody's ever come up with the hard cash needed to convert something from an idea into a film or a miniseries or whatever.
Yeah, it would be a tough nut to crack, but I think it would be a major work if it was ever it would bring it back to the world like that their stories. I think it's someday, hopefully,
Yeah,
someday.
someday.
Well, as I read the book, um, one thing that stood out to me is, a lot of time, and I've seen this even in media because I do a lot of historical recreation film and documentaries and museum films, and a lot of times it's very black and white. Americans are good; they're the white hat guys, and the British are bad. I've even seen in a movie where they were all instead of wearing the black neck stocks, they had like black masks. It was ridiculous. So
Mhm.
very very black and white, very strict. Even the Hessians have twirling mustaches. They're perfect villains. But it's definitely, in this book, it's definitely more complicated than that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you present the story in here, it becomes more of a civil war. It feels like it. Like the middle years are tough to follow a lot of times in war. But like the middle years, it really becomes like you've got loyalists against rebels. You've got, international war starts with the Spanish and the French getting involved. And honestly, really, and then the Hessians are starting, had just started getting involved. So do you see it that way too? This part?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, what had started out to be sort of an obscure brushfire conflict and insurrection on the edge of the British Empire in these middle years becomes an international war. First of all, it is a global war. It's because the French come into it, and then the Spanish, the Dutch are going to come into it, all against the British. The British essentially have no allies. Tiny Portugal is their only ally. They're buying allies with the Hessians. They're mercenaries, and 30,000 Germans are going to fight on their behalf, but they're not really allies. These are from different German principalities, small German states. And the war becomes a civil war because, first of all, you've got the mother country, Britain, fighting British citizens to start
Mhm.
with, which we are. And then I think more poignantly, actually, the rebels are fighting viciously against loyalists in America. And the British mistakenly believed that there was a silent majority of Americans, of the 2 million white Americans when the revolution began. They believed that a majority of them were actually tacitly, at least, loyal to the crown. Well, that's not true. Modern scholarship shows that about 20% of those 2 million were uh, convicted loyalists. And that's not enough to sway individual battles, even though tens of thousands of them take up arms on behalf of King George III and the British government. And it's not enough to control the levers of power. All 13 states remain under insurrectionist control after 1775. But it is enough to make a vicious civil war, and it gets increasingly bloody as the war goes on. The last couple of years of the war are going to be almost entirely in the South. And at that point, it anticipates the Civil War, not in the proximate causes of this schism, but in the animosity of American for American. And it contains all of the nastiness that every Civil War does, where there are atrocities committed by both sides. If you are a loyalist, and you are taking shelter from the British Army when they happen to be in your neighborhood and they leave, you're likely to have rebels come by, perhaps militia, perhaps continental troops, and they're going to say, you're either going to swear an oath renouncing allegiance to the crown, or we're going to take your farm, or we're going to burn your store, or we're going to put you in jail without hope of bond, we're going to beat you. Torture is not out of the question, and occasionally execution. And it works the other way too. The loyalists have the same kind of approach to rebels when they have the upper hand. So that's what the revolution becomes ultimately, and it's quite different than I think our fundamental schoolboy belief about good rebels
Mhm. Yeah.
leaving the plow in the furrow to take a musket on behalf of freedom. It's a lot more complex than that.
Right. Yeah, it's the same way with, how could white Southerners talk about freedom when they're slave owners? It's like, well, because it's complex. They're
Yeah,
they're very complex people. Yeah,
yeah,
it, Washington, he's revered. I mean, most people think of him as basically he's just a statue. He's impervious to criticism. I love presidential history, and he's always at the top of the list. And I'm like, well, I mean, he's the first, and he set a lot of trends, but I don't know if he's was literally the best. I mean, it's easy to say that, but maybe Lincoln's a little bit better. But I mean, how do you reconcile, as you portray him in the book from your research, how do you reconcile the man, like his personal insecurities and with him being this mythic leader? And if I may, he always I see him as like he wasn't the most brilliant commander that could ever be. He was, I know he had, Nathaniel Greene was very much a sounding board. And I believe like if Greene had, gave him a suggestion, he always took it and it was always the right one. Like he was like Jackson to Lee. It was very much an ally. But was it really his stamina and his ability to keep that charisma to keep everyone together? Or was there something else? Like, and I'll complicate it even more, like comparing for your two trilogies, Washington to Eisenhower. Like Eisenhower was the greatest general that ever lived, but there was something about him that kept everything working.
yeah, yeah. That's a good comparison, and I actually have made that comparison. I spent 15 years metaphorically living with Dwight Eisenhower, and the closer I was to him, first of all, the better I think I understood him as a general and as a man, and the more I admired him. And I've got the same kind of relationship now with Washington. It's now 12 years into it.
Hmm.
And I recognize that he's not a particularly good tactical commander. He doesn't see the battlefield spatially and temporally the way a great captain like Napoleon or even
Hmm.
Grant does. Um, he's um, he's got a lot of things that he doesn't know when he takes command of the Continental Army in July 1775. He's had 5 years of experience as a militia colonel for Virginia in the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, as they call it in Europe, always under superior British command. And he's seen quite a bit of combat, but it's been 16 years since he was in uniform as a militia colonel before he takes over the Continental Army. He doesn't know much about artillery. He doesn't know much about cavalry, even though Jefferson says he's the greatest horseman of his age. He knows nothing about continental logistics because there's never been a continental army. He arrives in New England as a Virginian, placed in command of what is largely a new continental army composed of New England militia units, and he's a foreigner. Connecticut is to Virginia
Hmm.
as America is to France, except they speak the same language, sorta.
Yeah.
And he has nothing good to say about New Englanders. He privately talks about dirty New Englanders, and he's really disparaging of the junior officers who report. He's got to understand, he's got to develop this mythical bond between leader and led that is important in any organization and never more important than in a military organization in a time of war. He's got to recognize that when he leaves Mount Vernon, he's got hundreds of enslaved blacks taking care of business for him while he's away. Over Washington's lifetime, at least 577 slaves lived at Mount Vernon. And he doesn't initially recognize the sacrifice that his soldiers are making to leave their farms and their shops, their foundries, their families, to serve with him in the cause. And he's got to come to grips with that. And he's got to convey to the troops that he knows in his bones, so that they know in their bones that they really have this bond, and that the bond will transcend setbacks. It will transcend the misery of camp life. It will endure to the death. He gets there ultimately, and it's one of the reasons why he is a successful war-winning general over the course of 8 years. He also has a number of attributes that he shares with Eisenhower, actually. He has a very good eye for subordinate talent. So he sees a 25-year-old overweight Boston bookseller named Henry Knox,
Hmm.
somehow intuits that this guy's going to be the father of American artillery. He sees a lapsed Quaker from Rhode Island uh, who's got very little military experience, named Nathaniel Greene, and somehow intuits that Greene is going to be second only to Washington as the indispensable man in the Continental Army, as you suggest, Kevin. Um, he's robust. He seems to never even catch cold over the course of 8 years at a time when smallpox, dysentery, typhus, typhoid, it's a
Hmm.
long list of infectious diseases are killing thousands and thousands of soldiers and civilians. This is really important. He shares this also with Eisenhower. Eisenhower smoking 4 packs of cigarettes a day,
Oh,
at the time of Normandy, and yet he is robust. He's got, and the last thing I'll say about him, and I can go on, but the last thing I'll say is he gives us an absolutely priceless gift. And that is an acknowledgement right from the get go, right from July 1775, that he is subordinate to civilian control of the military. He's at pains to write many, many letters, dozens of letters in the first a couple of years when he's in command to Congress, to state governors, to committees of safety. He's asking for a lot of things. He's asking for supplies and men, and I need this and I need that, and I'm informing you of this. But the subtext for all of it is uh, I will never threaten this wannabe republic with a military coup or with anything other than complete subservience of the military to civilian control. This is a fraught subject in the 18th century. They all know who Cromwell was. And Washington conveys this. He's going to reinforce it as president. And it's the reason you know well yourself from your own experience. There's never been a coup, and no military man that I know, and I know a lot of them, would be anything other than horrified at the prospect of a military usurpation of civilian control.
I mean, I guess like even in Newburgh, I guess in was it 83 or when the
Yeah,
conspiracy
yeah.
and he didn't have to do much, but pull out his glasses and say, now I'm
Mhm.
an old man and we're all old men together, like that kind of ideas, and they're all like, oh my God, you're right, and it
Yeah,
just
yeah,
that
no,
was
it's
done.
a very deft thing, and he pulls out his spectacles because I've grown blind, gray and blind in the service of my country. They're all crying. I mean,
Yeah,
this is such a powerful moment, and they have grievances, and they're entirely legitimate. They haven't been
yeah.
paid, and they get paid. The money's worth nothing, and Congress doesn't appreciate them. The country doesn't appreciate them, and there's a lot of grumbling going on, and he suppresses it very deftly. And I think that when we count up our blessings, and he's first known as the father of our country for the first time. It's in a German publication in Pennsylvania in early 1778. And I think it's true. He is the father of the country. And it starts when he's a general. And one of the reasons that we can give this accolade to him is this aspect of his certainty that civilians must control the powerful military in America.
Yeah, I read that when I was reading the chapter about Valley Forge, that how quickly he was writing letters. He didn't even he barely signed his name. He was like, and they were all letters to Congress asking the government to provide for the army. It wasn't like, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take that,
Right.
threatening them. It was like, please, beg. And like Eisenhower, I guess, on the other hand, had everything he could possibly need. Like the supplies were just,
Yeah.
never ending. We were the
Yeah.
never ending arsenal of democracy. So he never had to quite worry about that. But Washington truly had no food. There were
Absolutely.
moments of nothing. And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, at Valley Forge, more than 2,000 American soldiers die of disease and malnutrition, and they're threadbare. They are literally barefoot in many cases. So yes, he's this is a constant battle for him for the whole 8 years, having sufficient supplies. It's one of the reasons he asks Nathaniel Greene in early 1778 at Valley Forge to become quartermaster general. Greene says, "I don't want to.
Like that
Nobody in history has
like
ever heard of a quartermaster general.
it seems very demoted. You're like, I'm gonna be a what? No, I don't want
Yeah,
to be
right.
president.
Washington says, you got to do it. I need you to do it, man. And so finally, out of loyalty to Washington and to the cause, Greene does it. He does it brilliantly for 2 years.
Speaking of Valley Forge, I, w- you know, um, uh, von Steuben is a fascinating guy. He's just an odd
Yeah,
duck, and he kind of
yeah,
almost falls out of the sky. You're like, where did this guy come from?
yep.
And you really cover him really well. I learned a lot about him. And when I was reading it, maybe because I had just recently watched it, but he sounds like Barry Lyndon, like Brian O'Neill. You know what I mean? He's like this person
Uh-huh,
who falls into things and
uh-huh.
cons his way and
Yeah,
BS his way through.
yeah,
He does actually able to perform when needed. It's
yeah,
not fully
yeah,
BS.
yeah. No, it's certainly true. Yeah, he shows up at Valley Forge in the early spring of 1778. He's wearing a very flamboyant uniform, and he's bringing letters of recommendation from Franklin in Paris and others that claim that he is a baron. That's the only thing about it that's true. He's been given a
Oh,
barony from a minor princeling in Germany for services rendered. So he is a baron, but he is not a lieutenant general who had served Frederick the Great in various high level capacities. He'd been a captain in the Prussian army, and he'd seen a fair amount of experience, and he is an experienced officer. But it's nonsense that he's got various decorations and so on. The uniform, he has been misinformed while in France before he comes to America that the American uniforms are red. So he shows up and he's in this flamboyant red costume and quickly realizes that it's buff and blue, basically, and
mhm.
red is worn by the other guys. So the first thing he needs to do is find a dyer to transform this uniform into something that approximates blue or brown. Washington, first of all, is grateful to have him there because he sort of buys into the notion that this guy has more experience than he really does, but he recognizes that Steuben knows what he's doing, and it comes at an opportune moment where there's an opening for an inspector general, and so he appoints Steuben, and Steuben takes a small group of men and he begins to drill them, and he begins to teach them things that the Continental Army simply does not know and has not had time to learn, including how to maneuver on the battlefield, the manual of arms, pretty basic things that are vital if this is going to become a fighting force capable of slugging it out with the professional British Army. And he trains this initial cadre, and then the cadre go back to their regiments and they train others. By the time they break camp in late spring of 1778 at Valley Forge, he's done a pretty fine job of preparing this force. And the army at this point they're about 17,000 men in the Continental Army, which is sizable for 18th century. And they're imperfect. There's no doubt about that. And the officer corps leaves a lot to be desired. But they've come a long way thanks to Steuben. And Washington recognizes this, and he's going to keep Steuben close by to act as inspector general for years to come, looking for ways to improve, sometimes on the margins, sometimes on critically important things. Steuben becomes kind of his eyes and ears within the army, as inspectors general tend to. I think there are statues to Steuben around. He settles here in America after the war in New York.
I think Utica,
And
right? I believe.
yes, that's right. Yeah. The last thing I'll say about Steuben is that he has left Europe under difficult circumstances. He's been accused of taking improprieties with boys,
Hmm.
and he's in danger of arrest. It's not entirely clear whether there's truth to these accusations, but it's pretty serious. Uh, and so he basically is on the lam when he shows up in America. Um, I've never seen any evidence of improper behavior, pederasty by him when he comes to America, when he's in the Army.
Mhm.
But it's it's one of the complexities of this complex character's life.
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, regardless, I think if they knew, I think all the officers just ignored it. It's like it doesn't matter as long as he does his job.
Yes, I think that's true, and I don't think they. Eventually, he confesses that he is not all the things that he has claimed on his resume, that he never was a lieutenant general. But at that point, he's ingratiated himself and proven his worth. And it's when Congress finds out, they're like, whatever, just do your job.
Right. And I've got a copy of the Blue Book right here. Got my own
Ah,
copy of I think you mentioned it in your book how they had to use pages from like different newspapers and like
yeah.
over back
Hey,
page
how about
different
that?
things. They did the same thing here. It's great. So it's I know it well. Oh, that's why I was
Yeah.
fascinated by that part of the book. Um the Let's see, what's the question? Sorry. All right, you cover how Washington and Burgoyne seem to be the three big commanders between the two armies that you cover the most. Um, what are the differences in the leadership style, military doctrine that stood out to you, which was consequential here in the middle part of the war?
Yeah, well, let's start with the British. Howe has become William Howe has become the commanding general of British forces in America uh, during the battle for Boston. He shows up in the spring of 1775. He's had a fair amount of experience in combat. He's famous for climbing, scaling the cliffs of the St. Lawrence to the Plains of Abraham during the battle for Quebec in the French and Indian War. He comes from a family of warriors. His older brother has been killed by the French fighting them in the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, very close to Ticonderoga. He's considered the best soldier in the British Army when he's killed. And the citizens of Massachusetts are so taken with him that they pay for and have built a monument to him in Westminster Abbey. So
Hmm.
this is the Howe family. William also has an older brother who becomes Lord Howe with the death of the oldest of the Howes. And he's an admiral, Admiral Richard Howe, and he is one of the great fighting sea dogs in the history of the Royal Navy. And he is going to be the commander of the Royal Navy on the North American station. So he's a problem for us, the rebels,
Yeah.
because he knows what he's doing. William Howe doesn't seem to have his heart completely in the campaign. Burgoyne is a subordinate general to him, but he is given command of a Canadian army. It's called the Canada Army. And they're going to come down Lake Champlain. They're going to capture Ticonderoga and rout the American garrison there in July of 1777 and proceed on into the Hudson Valley with the intent of going perhaps to Albany and perhaps all the way to New York and cleaving off the New York states, the New England states from the Middle Atlantic states. It's not a bad plan. Howe is with the main army in New York. Instead of going up the Hudson Valley and meeting Burgoyne and unifying their forces and ensuring that New England is separated from the rest of the colonies, he decides he's going to go south. He goes the other direction, 180 degrees the other direction,
Hmm.
because he decides that a war-winning strategy is to take Philadelphia and to basically recover Pennsylvania. He thinks there's a lot of loyalists in Pennsylvania. Now, this is strategically incomprehensible. And the person who should be adjudicating this, Lord George Germain, who's the American secretary, former British general, he's the Robert McNamara of the war for the British. He says he does not adjudicate. He basically tells Hal to do what he wants and Burgoyne's to do what he wants. And so the campaign of 1777 is going to come unstitched for the British. Burgoyne is going to find that as his lines of communication all the way back to Montreal get longer and thinner, he's got serious supply problems. He's being ambushed and heckled constantly by militia and continental forces. And he's going to end up losing all 8,000 men that he's brought out of Canada including defeats at Bennington and the two battles at Saratoga in the fall of 1777. Howe does capture Philadelphia, but so what? It's not really a national capital. It's a good place to spend the winter for them. The Americans are spending that miserable winter in Valley Forge, but it is strategically not vital to the American cause. Congress flees, as Congress always does when the British get
Mhm.
nearby. So that's the two of them. And Howe is disgruntled, and London's disgruntled with Howe. And he's going to leave in the spring of 1778 as the British are evacuating Philadelphia. He's going to be succeeded by Henry Clinton. So he goes back to London somewhat in disgrace. There's a lot of uh, bickering in Parliament and so on. Burgoyne's in prison, and Burgoyne is, going to be exchanged, going to be freed, but his entire army, those 8,000 men, for the most part, are in jails, and they're going to be marched first to Boston, and then the next winter they're going to be marched to Charlottesville, which is a long way from Boston to
Yeah.
march in the winter, because the rebels want to keep them out of reach of British raiders. So, this is one of the reasons why the British are not successful in the middle years of the war. Washington, on the other hand, and I'll be brief about him, he is natively very aggressive, and he wants to mix it up. He wants, fisticuffs, one titanic battle to decide the war, and he realizes, having had his butt handed to him a couple times early in the war, including at Long Island, where he nearly loses the army. Uh, he's chased across New Jersey. His army's down to 3,000 men then. It's serious. He writes to his brother in December of 1776. I think the game is pretty near up. This causes him to reevaluate, and again, this is a tribute to his generalship, to reevaluate strategic imperatives. He is going to basically fight on the strategic defensive for the rest of his war. He's going to look for opportunities to nick and bleed the British when he can. He'll look for opportunities when he's really got an advantage to meet them in battle. But for the most part, he's going to dance away from them and look to wear down the army and wear down British public opinion, so that the immense cost in blood and treasure to the British Empire is going to cause Britons to rethink about what they're doing. Um, this ultimately is a war-winning strategy. Washington, again, it's not really the kind of war he wants to fight, but it's the kind of war he realizes that he has to fight. The last big battle of the Revolution in the North is at Monmouth in northern New
Mhm.
Jersey in June of 1778. Uh, it's a near run thing for the Americans. Things go badly. Henry Clinton, the British commander, who's retreating out of Philadelphia toward New York, uh, wheels around abruptly, and the American army is in peril at one point. And Washington kind of rides to the rescue and stabilizes things, it's a draw in the long run. The war after that, except for skirmishing and more or less minor battles, is going to move increasingly to the south, and it's going to be entirely in the south the last 2 years of the war.
Which is your next book. You're going to be
It
spending
is,
a lot of time in
yes,
North Carolina, South Carolina, and New Yorktown.
correct.
That's right. Um, Here's a question, kind of bringing it to modern day. The parallels. Okay, you mentioned the kind of the bleeding them out, like let's prolong the war and make it costly. And it seems like Robert E. Lee attempted to do that. Let's make it really long and costly, but failing to realize that the North had an endless supply of troops and they're just around the corner. They're just
Right.
over the border. Whereas in Britain, they're an ocean away, and it was a little bit,
Yeah.
once you knock Canada out, and I think it was a line here. I remember that I underlined it. It was Britain remained friendless as she had been since 1763, and I never thought about that. Like you're right, they had no allies.
Yeah.
Whereas America's bringing in pretty much the rest of Europe, and they just didn't have. They had to buy their friends. They had
Yeah.
nobody. The French, Spanish, everybody hated them. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. They were completely isolated, which is really hard to fathom because I don't think of other wars like that where you just have somebody fighting all by themselves, completely isolated. And yeah, that was just it, something that kind of really struck me. Um, but do you see parallels between Britain's struggle to maintain imperial control of America and like more recent counterinsurgency efforts, especially in modern warfare? You know, with Afghanistan and Iraq um, and I guess even in Vietnam, where where they're trying to hold on, but it seems like the same idea, almost like with Vietnam. There's just no way to plug those holes. You're never gonna stop it.
Yeah,
No
I think
matter how hard.
I think you're right, Kevin. I think there are parallels. I mean, one of the things that you can see looking at counterinsurgency doctrine and counterinsurgency history, if you're waging an expeditionary war, meaning you have to travel somewhere a distance, and it's a counterinsurgency that you're wagering, whether it's the British in the 18th century, or it's the Americans in Vietnam, or the Americans in Iraq or Afghanistan, you have to win. If you're the insurgents and you're fighting on your home territory, and particularly if you've got sanctuaries, whether it's Pakistan for the Taliban, or in the case of the Americans, sanctuary is just dancing over the next hill where they can't get at you to the
Hmm.
west or to the north. You have to just not lose,
Yeah.
and that's a difference. And consequently, the British never figure out how to win. They are waging war for 8 years, as it turns out, across 3,000 miles of open ocean in the age of sail. They make several strategic miscalculations. I mentioned one of them. They believe that there are more loyalists in America than actually exist. That's one mistake. They believe that the American colonies in general are going to be cowed by superior British firepower. That's why they're surprised when the other 12 colonies rallied in Massachusetts when the war begins in
Hmm.
1775, because they think that, these guys aren't going to stand up to us. Well, all it does is irritate them. And the other colonies say, look, if it can happen to if it can happen to Massachusetts, it can happen to us. So
Hmm.
that's wrong. And then a really significant error of judgment is that the king and his government and both houses, majorities of both houses of parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, are convinced virtually to the end of the war that allowing the American colonies to slip away and the insurrection to succeed will encourage rebellions, insurrections in Canada, in Ireland, in India, in the sugar islands of the West Indies, where the real money is, and that it'll be the beginning of the end of the first British Empire, which has been created in 1763 with Britain's overwhelming victory over the French and Spanish in the Seven Years' War. And the king isn't just not he's prepared to abdicate before allowing that. He prepares an abdication speech late in the war. This is wrong, and they're told by some voices in Britain that this is wrong. For example, Adam Smith, he's a Scottish political philosopher, and his monumental work, Wealth of Nations, is published in 1776. And Adam Smith says, this is not how it needs to work. You don't need to have this mercantile system where you extract raw materials from the colonies, you make them buy the finished products, you restrict their industries so they don't compete with industries, whether it's making hats or ships or whatever, in the mother country. You can get where you want to go with international trade. It can be a more stable, a more productive relationship. Well, the king doesn't buy it, the government doesn't buy it. Uh, uh, you know, um, uh, William Pitt, who is the architect of British victory in the Seven Years' War, when this first British Empire is formed, he's become Lord Chatham. He's been elevated to the peerage, and uh, Chatham says on the floor of the House of Lords in one of the most ringing speeches in the history of Parliament, if I were an American, as I am an Englishman, I would never accede to having foreign troops on my territory. Never, never, never. You hear his voice through 250 years ringing out in the
Yeah.
halls. So, Chatham sees the problems here. But, the powers that be, starting with George III, are not convinced, and they're going to pursue this war to the bloody end.
Not thinking about what are they going to win? What's the win? You're gonna
Or make
submit everyone, and then none of them want you there anyway. They're never gonna say, "Okay, you're fine. You can." You're
exactly
still.
right. And this is also pointed out to them. Edmund Burke, one of the great orators, he's a Irish-born Protestant member of Parliament, and he says even if you succeed with by force of arms in defeating the Continental Army and making them submit, you're going to have to keep an enormous army of occupation there.
Yeah,
You're going to be fighting a guerrilla war of one sort or another somewhere. They're just never. And by the way, the American colonies are doubling in size, population every 25 years. It's a rate of growth unseen in all of European history. It's 4 times the rate of growth of England. So eventually, your baby little colonies are going to be way bigger than you are, as we know that has happened.
wow.
So when you get the big ideas wrong, as David Petraeus likes to say, it's hard for the outcome that you expect and desire to actually fall in place.
That's a very good point. Now, one of the things I want to talk about the writing, which is interesting to me. You write like with a cinematic quality, the very descriptive and very approachable. Um, what techniques or sources help you breathe life into something from 250 years ago? And what's your ritual and how you craft your scenes?
Yeah, that's well, I'm an archive rat, first of all. The mystery of the next unopened archival box is one of the things that keeps me going. I try to write so that I can empower the reader's imagination, but it's got to be with all the rigor of the academy. I subscribe to the notion that everything needs to be heavily annotated. It's one of the reasons the book is as long as it is. There's 200 pages of back matter, which is the notes and the bibliography and all the rest of it. So I'm always looking for those little brushstrokes of detail, the little flecks of gold that you find by really panning for gold in the archives and in hundreds of secondary sources. There've been a lot of books written from the time of the Revolution. I spend a lot of time with the papers of the founders. Washington's papers are brilliantly curated by the University of Virginia. They've been working at it since 1968. They're almost finished. Franklin's papers by Yale, Hamilton's by Columbia, Green's papers by the University of North Carolina. I spend lots and lots of time. You can see
Yeah.
papers behind me. Washington's papers and Green's papers are right behind me. I spent about 3 years researching both primary and secondary sources. I put a mark on the wall. I said, okay, that's where I stop. You can wander into the woods and never wander out. And then I spend 6 to 8 months organizing. I make a huge outline of how I see this narrative unfolding and where everything is in my notes. And then I sit down and write. I'm an old newspaper guy, so I can type fast. I write about 1,000 words a day, typically. That's equal to a normal day story for a newspaper reporter. So if it's a 250,000 word book, I tell myself, oh, I'm just doing 250 day stories. That's nothing. That's
Hmm.
a year's work as a newspaper reporter. I've done it now for 8 books, about 5 different American wars, and I've got the routine down Pretty well, I think. I've got this comfortable office in Northwest Washington. That's where I do all my writing. I've had the same editor since The Long Gray Line, since 1987, John
Wow.
Sterling. We've done all 8 books together. He's not only a terrific editor, but he's one of my closest friends, and we really work hand in glove. I've had the same agent since 1986.
Wow.
So three of us are kind of a troika. It's very unusual in publishing, actually.
Yeah, that seems unusual, but it's working, and how long does it take you to write? Is it several years between books to make sure that they're perfect?
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're perfect or not, but
Well,
it takes 7 years for them to get done, perfect or not. Yeah, I started working on the Revolution trilogy just after the third and final volume of the World War II trilogy was published in 2013. First book was published in 2019. That's 6 years.
wow.
Now it's 2025. Second book just published. That's another 6 years.
Yeah.
I'm older and slower. I have no illusions that it's going to happen any quicker for this third volume. So I do the research myself, which is one reason it takes as long as it does. It has to go through my eyes and through my brain,
I
uh,
understand.
rather than have some people have research teams or whatever. I
Yes.
can't. I
I
can't
can hear.
imagine.
Yeah, yeah, I know that people have that, and I can't imagine that. So I can see your point
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I have to understand where it's all coming from and where it all came, and where it's
yeah,
going. Now,
yep.
was there, it seems like you go to primary sources first because you want to try and find something that people haven't talked about or have overlooked. Is there a primary source or something you came across that completely altered your understanding of this period of the war?
Well, I had a very good fortune, Kevin. I'll tell you about it. In late 2015, Queen Elizabeth II opened up to outside scrutiny the Georgian papers, which she owned, as part of a project to digitize and catalog the papers of all four Georges who became king in the 18th and 19th centuries. And I was among the first allowed in to take a look. I was in Windsor, which is 20 miles west of London, for a whole month, April 2016. Every day I would show my badge at the Henry VIII gate to get into the castle at Windsor, and it is a real castle, and show my badge again at the Norman gate, and I would climb 102 stone steps and 21 wooden stairs to the garret of the Round Tower, begun by William the Conqueror in the 11th century. And that's where they keep the papers. And George III was his own secretary until late in life when he began to go blind. And he wrote most of his correspondence himself. He made the copies
Wow.
himself frequently. So most of these papers, the Georgian papers, were from the reign of George III, who was king for almost 60 years, most of them previously unpublished. And you really have a tactile sense of being in his presence. And it was that experience and that opportunity that really, first of all, made me see that George is not the royal brute that Thomas Paine calls him in Common Sense, published in January 1776. He's not the tyrant that Jefferson calls him in the Declaration of Independence. He's not the sinister ninny who prances across the stage in Hamilton every night, singing "You'll Be Back." He's a constitutional monarch. He's a patriot king. He's a child of the Enlightenment. He's deeply committed to the arts and the sciences. He's a devoted husband. Marries an obscure, drab German princess, Charlotte, as in Charlottesville, Virginia, Charlotte, North Carolina. She gives him 15 children, and you can see he's a devoted father. So he's got a lot going for him. He's also irascible and stubborn and so committed to suppressing the insurrection and preventing American independence that he's threatened to abdicate. And he's going to wage war. The British spent the equivalent in today's dollars of about $25 billion, more than 30,000 British and German casualties during the war.
Yeah.
It's a nasty thing, and it's very expensive. He's going to lose 500,000 square miles of the British Empire as a consequence of of the war that he loses. Having the opportunity to get to know George, and I don't really like him per se but I don't detest him, and I don't see him as the caricature that Americans and even British frequently do, as kind of this ornery clown king.
The yeah, madness of King George. Yeah, he.
Yeah, and he does have, and that's the last thing to say about him. The Madness of King George was a stage play and then a movie, and he had a mysterious illness that first struck in the 1760s, right after he became king, and it was passing, and the Queen helped cover it up. Throughout the American Revolution, he is perfectly healthy. He is robust. He goes horseback riding almost every morning, regardless of the weather. Uh, then he's got another episode in 1788 in which he is so delusional and so violent that he's in a straitjacket for a while. It was thought at one time that it was porphyria, which is a blood disease that can cause hallucinations and affect your behavior. Now it's pretty well considered that he's a manic depressive, and it plays out in this very profound way, affecting his behavior. Comes back in 1804 for several months, again, straitjackets, isolation. He's manic, talks incessantly. It goes away, and then it comes back in 1810, and it never goes away. So the last 10 years of his life are absolutely miserable. He's just, his life collapses around him. The Queen comes to see him. This is a loving marriage. Comes to see him for the last time in 1812 for 15 minutes and never sees him again. And he grows a long white beard. He plays the harpsichord, even though he's deaf and blind. He can't hear the notes that he's playing.
Wow.
And he's going to die of pneumonia in 1820 at the age of 82. A really tragic figure in the long run.
Do you think, I mean, it's easy to make a correlation, but like, do you think that the law that's putting so much into trying to hold on to America and then losing it, do you think he had, it was that, did you think a delayed reaction of some sort, or did you think that broke him a little bit, or how did he handle that loss in 18?
He didn't handle it well. John Adams was our first ambassador, first minister to the court of St. James several years after the revolution ended. And when he had his first interview with George, when he shows up to present his credentials and so on, George tells him, I was the last to give it up, which is true, basically. And he's bears a grudge. I don't think this is the cause of his mental instability. The episode that really sends him over the edge, his youngest child, Princess Amelia, dies, and that unhorses him for sure.
Feels like
One of
almost
the
like
earlier,
it's like Teddy Roosevelt when he lost Quentin or Quint yeah, when he lost his youngest son, Teddy Roosevelt. Like we
yeah,
was that was
yeah, yeah. Quentin was killed in World War One, and then Theodore Roosevelt Jr. is going to be with me as he is
Mhm.
often
He is,
in
yes.
World War Two, Brigadier General Roosevelt.
I can see a
Uh,
child breaking at someone.
yeah, it's unspeakable anguish, and that may have triggered it. One of his many incomprehensibly untalented doctors speculates that he was reading King Lear, and that pushes him over the edge. Reading about, well, I don't think so. I think there's a chemical issues involved.
Yeah. Now, there's one kind of final question. Well, if I could do two more. One,
Sure.
I've always found the middle parts of wars difficult the beginning is exciting. World War II, Pearl Harbor through North Africa. It's new, it's exciting. The armies are trying to figure themselves out. All the big personalities are coming to the fray. And then of course D-Day to the Rhine is this exciting period. Same thing with the revolution. From the Tea Party and Lexington Green to the Bunker Hill to 70s, Trenton, very exciting. It never stops. And then, of course, Yorktown and all of that, and Guilford Courthouse and Cowpens are, there's kind of like trains that never end. But like the middle is like the act two of a movie. It's the slog. It's the hard part. And that to me is like, well, this book and then also your second book, World War II, like Sicily and Italy, and the fighting in Italy is this kind of just like never ending, beating yourself into a wall almost. And do you see parallels between the middle book in both of your trilogies?
Yeah, in that sense, the narrative arc is such that it really does become a slog. Now, in the Revolution, we've got a lot of fighting. There's a lot of battles. There's Brandywine, there's Germantown, there's the battle for the Delaware in Philadelphia, there's Bennington, Saratoga, Oriskany, Savannah, Charleston. So it's nip and tuck, and on any given day, the Americans seem to be up, and any given day, the Americans seem to be down. And when this book ends with the fall of Charleston in May of 1780, an American army has been trapped and besieged and destroyed in Charleston. 5,000 men captured or killed. Things look really grim for the cause at that point, even though 5 years into it, you begin to wonder, with respect to the British, why don't the bastards give up? Why don't they know that this isn't working out for them? Well, at this point, it looks like, their Southern strategy, which is what we're going to see in the second half of the fate of the day, which is to roll up the colonies from the South to take Georgia and then South Carolina, and then into North Carolina and Virginia. And so maybe we win that way. Well, it's beginning to look like maybe that's a pretty good war winning strategy finally. So, yeah, there's, I think as a narrative writer, trying to keep people interested in it is part of my job. I think the drama of it, the way characters evolve or devolve, succeed or fail, interact or despise one another. And then the combat scenes are pretty intense. They're as intense as anything elsewhere in the war. So, and then it becomes a global war, which I spend quite a lot of time
Mhm.
in France, in England, trying to understand what the Spanish are doing. It becomes a naval war in a way that is not in the first couple of years. So we have the John Paul Joneses of the revolution come into it. There's a Franco-Spanish armada off the southern coast of England in the summer of 1779, intent on invading and taking Portsmouth, the biggest naval base in England, and perhaps marching on London. Well, this is high drama.
Mhm.
It's a bigger armada than the one of 1588. So there's a lot that happens in these middle years.
I guess compared to Sicily and Italy, which were really, to me, it feels like they were really hard fought, almost endless fights. Like
Yeah,
just
23,000 Americans killed in Italy. That's
and they're almost like a footnote between North Africa and D-Day. It's like, oh yeah, then the guys fought in Italy. It's like, man, that was that was hard fight. That's
yeah,
almost
that's right, Kevin. I mean, Rome falls on June 4th, 1944.
and everyone forget. No one
Yeah,
noticed.
2 days later, something big happens in Normandy, and Italy falls off the front pages for the rest of the war.
Yeah, yeah. That's I think. Yeah, I guess your second book in that trilogy is a harder. It was just a harder fight for everyone that was doing the fighting. The
Yeah,
Germans had stuck in Italy, and then the Americans. It just seemed brutal.
yeah,
Seemed like a hard. And the sad part is that it is the one that is overlooked the most if something's overlooked. And then
true.
yeah, whereas the American Revolution battles you're talking about, you're right. Each one of them has their importance. It's not as yeah, it's a different. Um, if you could, and here's a going into fantasy land. If you could walk one battlefield or historic site with a founding father or someone from the Continental Army that you feature in your book, who would it be and where would it be?
Ah, well, I'm really taken with the Battle of Germantown, which is October 4th, 1777. And Washington has had his butt handed to him at Brandywine. He's not performed well tactically. And things aren't going well. The British are going to capture Philadelphia. They do take Philadelphia. Uh, Again, this is Washington's aggressiveness, and he decides he's going to launch a sneak attack on the Germans, on the British and Germans who are encamped in Germantown, which is 5 miles north of Philadelphia. And he's going to launch a surprise attack at night. And it's a complex plan, too complex as it turns out, 4 different columns approaching through the night, attacking at dawn at the same time from 4 different directions. I would love to walk that battlefield with Washington. I would like Knox to be there too, because the critical point in the battle, the British are taken by surprise. They're falling back. The attack is going well. There are a fair number of British casualties. And that we get to a mansion. It's called the Chew House because it was owned by Benjamin Chew, had been a member of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court before the Revolution. He's a loyalist, so he's in jail at this point. His house is empty. It's also known as Cliveden, and it is a stout fortress. And the British, one regiment, about 100 men, take refuge and barricade themselves in that house. And Washington and Knox are having a conversation about what to do about this house. Some are advocating just go around it, isolate them. 100 guys, you'll trap them in the house. If they come out, you kill them or capture them. Knox, whose learning is largely book learning at this point, proposes to Washington that it's militarily incomprehensible to leave a fortress in your rear and just go around them and keep pursuing the British, because the British have been driven back into Germantown, and there are aspirations of sending them all the way back into Philadelphia. Washington listens to this. The aides are listening, including Alexander Hamilton, Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton, Lieutenant Colonel John Lawrence. They're basically thinking, no, just go around, just go around. Well, Washington listens to Knox, and it stops dead the momentum of the attack. It gives the British and the Germans time to gather themselves to counterattack. And what had been victory turns into defeat. The Americans are routed. Excuse me. So I would like the opportunity to walk that ground with Washington. The Chew House is still there. You can go in it. It's a little bit of a derelict, but it is haunting. There's still bullet marks and cannonball scars on the exterior of the house. So I'd like Washington to explain to me exactly what it was he thought he was doing there.
I get that goes back to your like tactically, sometimes some decisions were made that probably should have been rethought, but strategically he had a better sense of things. And
Yeah.
that made a bad decision. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate this discussion and your answers to some of my questions. And is there anything else you'd like me to know, or like the viewers to know that that we haven't covered about your book?
No, we covered a lot of ground. I
So
think
does the
that
book. So it's appropriate. It covers a lot
the
of
book
ground.
does cover a lot of ground. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, I would, as we swing into the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the country's founding, it's an opportunity for commemoration and celebration. I would like people to remember that we're the beneficiaries of an enlightened political heritage handed down to us from that revolutionary generation. And that bequest includes personal liberties. It includes strictures on how to divide power and keep it from concentrating in the hands of autocrats who think primarily of themselves. And I would like people to recall that we cannot let that heritage slip away, and we cannot be oblivious to the hundreds of thousands who've given their lives to affirm and sustain it over the past 250 years. I think that's what the essence of the revolution is about, and particularly as we get into this season of commemoration.
Well, that's very well said, and I agree with you completely. Well, if anyone wants to get more information about you or your next book or your other books, where should they go?
www.rickatkinsonbooks.com will tell you more than you ever cared to know.
Well, I'm looking forward to your next book. I guess you're not planning another trilogy, or you're just focused on winning the war at this point. Just
Yes, Kevin.
yeah,
I'm planning nothing other than to take on volume three and hoping to be there at the end.
that's good. Well, that'll be good to have a finale. Well, thank you very much. Again, the book is Fate of the Day. It's out now, and it is quite a read. This is a summer read, all summer. And you're gonna really get a deep dive into the revolution, the mid period of the revolution, and yeah, it's a fantastic book. And like I said, you were an inspiration a long time ago with the long gray line, and I'm really glad I was finally able to meet you and talk to you about this.
I enjoyed it very much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate your interest in the book and your deep dive into this.
Well, thank you, Rick, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
You too. Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.